Hello and welcome to episode 184 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. With the D23 Expo taking place this weekend in Anaheim, California, we'll be talking a lot over the next few weeks about the announcements to come out of the Disney Parks, Experiences, and Products panel. Since theme park news will take up so much of the next month or so on the show, I thought it would be a good time to change directions a bit for this week's episode. My guest today will be Ethan Gallogly, a backpacker and author of the book The Trail, a Novel. For those of you who have listened to the show for the first 3.5 years, you know that I absolutely love hiking, and I think it is a big part of travel. I'm working on so much great theme park content for those of you who love Disney and Universal. Maz and I are ready to analyze everything announced at D23. My other co-host Sarah Says will be returning after a little hiatus to talk about Disney. I have media credentials for Tampa Bay Comic-Con in a little over a week, and I'm so excited that it was recently announced that Jodie Benson, the voice of Ariel from the original animated version of The Little Mermaid, will be at the con. The event will also feature an appearance from Anakin Skywalker himself, Hayden Christensen. On August 29th, Epcot will be kicking off the 2024 version of the Food and Wine Festival, and I'll have a lot of information on that as well. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel so that you can keep up with everything happening on the channel. Let's get started with our main conversation today. Thanks for being here, Ethan.
Thank you for having me, Rick.
So apparently I have some questions prepared for you, but you had a very busy morning and I'm supposed to ask you about it.
Yeah, it's crazy. You know, I'm a backpacker and an author, and I try to keep in shape. And I went out riding this morning on what's called an elliptico. It's an elliptical bicycle. And I do not know what happened, but I took a turn, I took a face plant, and for a second there, I was like, am I okay? Am I going into, the hospital? What just happened here? So, it was quite a morning, but I'm all right and glad to be here.
So that is why we have you here, the backpacking part of that equation, well, even the author part of that equation. And you are a backpacker. As people who have been listening to my show for a number of years know, back in 2022, I hiked across Ireland on Ireland's National Famine Way. This is something that I'm trying to do more and more, is get out there in nature, do some more hikes. And you're about to set off on a really big one. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'll just back up a bit. And by the way, that's amazing about Ireland. My ancestry is from Ireland, and I have never been. I intend to go, and I would love to do some kind of trans Ireland hike. I wasn't even aware of that. You got to tell me more about it. That sounds just fantastic. So I've been backpacking for years. I mean, I've been a reviewer for some books on the Sierra Nevada mountains. I've been hiking for over 30 years now. And when I turned 50, I decided to do my longest trip yet, which was 28 days on the John Muir Trail. And I hiked from Yosemite to the top of Mount Whitney, and it was just life-changing. I'd never done a trip of that magnitude or length before. And, out of it came this book on the John Muir Trail, which I was, when I came out, I was just in such awe about everything I'd seen, the people I'd met, just the transformation I went through being out of touch, off the cell phone, and in the wilderness for that length of time. It was life-changing. And I wanted to give a talk at the college I was teaching at the time, and I'd scheduled a talk on it. And I'm a retired professor. I went and I researched the history and the background of the trail. It was fascinating, and I was all set. And some guy came and took my time spot. Somebody who couldn't do another time. So there I am with all this material, no lecture, and I'm thinking, wow, I've got enough stuff here for a book. This is interesting. And I didn't want to write a book about my trip. I mean, my trip was interesting, but it wasn't, that amazing. I wanted a book that would really attract readers and show people why backpacking and wilderness and time in nature is so important, and also share a little of the history of the Muir Trail that I'd discovered. So I wrote a fictional novel. I created two characters hiking the trail, but I gave them the same itinerary I did. All the places in the book are real. All the kind of people they meet are based on real people I've met out there. And I wove it into a fictional story with the history and the background and some philosophy. And the hero, he's not very likable at the beginning. He's overweight. He doesn't want to go backpacking. He suffers a lot of mishaps and really suffers for the beginning. But he undergoes this amazing transformation through nature and through hiking. And by doing it that way, I think I bring sort of your average reader in, a person who wouldn't necessarily want to be in the woods, can see themselves through Gil, through my protagonist, or I call him my proagonist sometimes. They can see themselves through him, and then I can slowly, slowly share through Gil's transformation what it is that's so amazing. And I'm sure having crossed Ireland, about being out there in the mountains. And so that's my book, and that's it's called The Trail. Very simple. Yeah, it's up on Amazon and Audible. We've got a great narrator. So I mean, and it's been a bestseller on Amazon for over a year now. So your listeners can check that out. But that's what I did when I turned 50. And since then, I've just gotten into this long distance hiking. I've done some crazy things. And I've been working on completing the Pacific Crest Trail now, which is 2,650 miles last I checked, from the Mexican border to Canada, across, the mountains of the West. So it's a pretty crazy adventure, and I've been working on that, and I'm going back to pick up another couple of 100 miles in August.
So what you're doing is you're kind of hitting it in chunks here so that you get the whole thing done, but you're doing it a few months at a time.
Yeah, exactly. It's called section hiking. And I set out last year to do the whole thing, which is called a through hike, where you go end to end continuously. And to do that, there's a big challenge. You got to start early in the year, because you're going through the California deserts in the south, and they get really, really toasty. But then you've got the mountains, which get snowed in. The Sierra had a huge dump of snow last year, if you can recall. It was just crazy amounts of it was record snow last year. So you've got the Sierra covered in snow, and if you hit that too early, you're trudging through snow. And then you've got wildfires come August, September in the Sierra and in Oregon. And then, of course, if you don't make it to Canada before the end of September, it starts to snow up there. So it's a huge challenge. And the problem is, you've got to keep moving at a pretty fast clip. To do the Pacific Crest Trail in, let's say, 4 or 5 months. 5 months is about what I set up for myself. Some people do it faster. But to do it in 4 or 5 months, you're talking about 15 to 20 miles a day, every day, day in, day out, with maybe a day off every 10 days to resupply in a town and take a shower. It's a crazy, punishing schedule. And I started, and I got a couple of 100 miles, but I'm at an age where I can't keep up with the 20-year-olds. It's really tough to put on that kind of miles day after day. And I got injured, and I did a reassessment, and I just said, I can't do this pace. I can't do this physically. It's too much. I'm going to enjoy this a lot more as a section hike. So I got off trail last year, and this year, in April, I was down and picked up where I left off in SoCal, and now I've got to go back and kind of do the next section up to Lake Tahoe. So I'm enjoying it, but as a section hiker now, it's a lot more relaxed. I don't have the stress, but I've lost something. I've lost that sense of, being with the people all the way through. But I mean, I don't know. How long were you in Ireland for?
Well, I was going to bring up my particular situation because I had a similar yet different experience where if you picture Ireland, it is taller than it is wide, correct?
Hmm.
So I was originally set to hike the Ireland Way, which would go from the southwest corner to the very northern tip of Ireland. And I got out on the trail and we were in the mountains. What you were describing is you gave yourself a certain amount of time to finish this. And I did as well, except for my time included international flights back and my job starting again. So I had sort of a drop dead finish time that I had to accomplish. And the second or third day I was out on the Ireland Way, which was going to take, from all my research, was going to take about 40 days. And the second day, I suffered a knee injury that had me sidelined for 3 days.
Wow.
And that threw off a lot of my timing. And there were some other things that we were finding out that, through the pandemic, there were parts of the trail that weren't being upkept. And it was also when Ireland was receiving a lot of Ukrainian refugees. So a lot of the bed and breakfasts on the way, a lot of the hostels, and a lot of the places to stay. I mean, I was backpacking, I had a tent, but every couple of days I would stay somewhere so that you could get that shower. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And that was the plan. So I ended up switching trails because I switched to one that went west to east, which was a little shorter, and went through towns so that if I needed to see a doctor for my knee, I was able to do that. I would have access to a doctor every other day. So I ended up switching it to the National Famine Way, which went west to east. So, like you, I had a different thing in mind, but I ended up still getting the same kind of joy out of it. I don't even know if that's the right word. The same type of experience where really, we set those goals when we're living in the real world, when we're so goal oriented. In reality, the thing is to get out of that grind. And if there's something you can't do, breaking it up in a way that you can do it is much better than not doing it, right?
Absolutely, and you're wise to keep your trip in a way where you've got access to a doctor if you need it, and what you said is the most important. You're still enjoying it, and that for me was sort of the revelation I had was, wow, I'm really not enjoying this. Was how I felt because it had gone from being this beautiful experience of backpacking, which I love, to almost like a job where you're waking up, you're packing your tent, you're making your miles, you're eating your dinner, you're going to sleep. In the PCT, there's no hostels or anything. You're just out in the wilderness. But it became really a grind where it was work. And I wasn't having those moments that I love backpacking where you're just going slow and you're looking at the scenery and you're sort of transcending the world. You're becoming a part of nature. Those are the things I love. And by slowing it down, by taking it a little bit slower and not making it this arduous task to get to a goal, but just enjoying the moment, it's now become a pleasure. It's just back to what I love about backpacking is you come to a lake, you come to something that's fantastic. You see some animal and you can stop and watch it and meditate and enjoy. Whereas when you're on this time schedule, like you said, you're always like, boy, I'd love to stop here, but gee, I've got another 20 miles. It's horrible. And like you said, the international travelers who come here, they really have to deal with this because they get a limited visa. Some of them are on a 3-month visa. And so if you're going to do that in the Pacific Crest Trail, you either have to decide, okay, I'm not going to do all of this in a season, or you really have to push yourself hard. And if you're young, if you're 20 and you can do 20-mile days, sure, why not? But and I shouldn't say young because I have been passed by some 50, 60, even a 70-year-old guy who just blew by me. You could see they're trail runners, they're marathon people, and they are in fantastic shape, and they can totally handle this. But I'm not there. And it's for me, it's about the pleasure of just disconnecting and being in nature. That's what I love.
Well, when you talk about enjoying it, in my situation, I told you that right now, a guy I met on that hiking excursion is hiking the PCT, where you're going to be rejoining here in a bit. And when I suffered that injury and I was sitting on the top of a mountain in Ireland looking out on Bantry Bay, and there was just this beautiful, like it would be on a calendar that would be in your grandmother's wall, right? Just this beautiful picture out in front of us. And this hiker, his name's Barter. His hiking name is Barter, and he likes when I share that, so that's not a problem. He looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I understand like you're struggling right now, but isn't this amazing? Aren't you having the time of your life?" And it was when I realized that I wasn't, and that I couldn't quite enjoy it because of how much stress I had put on making a certain amount of time every day, that I realized I had to switch trails. Because if I couldn't enjoy that moment, like that's why you get out and do these things. And I want to sort of move on to something similar, because this isn't a hiking podcast, it's a travel podcast. So I really want to stress, when you do things like this, whether it's a through hike, whether it's a section hike, whether you just find a trail on a day on your vacation and get out into nature, that's hiking as well. And what do you find that you learn, not necessarily just in the hiking aspect, but sort of in the travel aspect, where you get to see things that you wouldn't see normally? You get to interact with people that if you were just visiting these places as a tourist, you wouldn't necessarily interact with them.
But that's a perfect question, Rick. And this actually segues very nicely between the previous topic, because I wanted to say exactly, when you're traveling, it's sort of the same thing. You have to stop and reassess sometimes. I've seen people, and I've done quite a bit of international travel, and I've seen folks who are just on this crazy itinerary, just like, you and I were on these trips where, okay, this morning I've got to go to Notre Dame, and this afternoon climb the Eiffel Tower. And then if we've got time, we're going to go do the catacombs. I'm talking about Paris here. And they've got this itinerary that they just can't bend, where they're stuck on all these sites. And then you run into some interesting thing and you can't stop and absorb it. And you're just stressed out with making all these sites and checklists, and you miss the real experience. I think when you're traveling, you've got to let that go. Yes, you should put one important thing on your itinerary, maybe every other day that you really want to do. But the real experiences traveling are what's in between. You're in a little cafe and you're eating lunch, and there's somebody there, and they say, you get into a conversation and they say, "Oh, do you want to come see my village?" If you're on an itinerary, you can't do that. But if you get an invitation by a local to go and visit with them, you're going to see so much more and learn so much more about the place you're in and the culture and the food. than you ever would visiting these. They're like Disneyland. They whisk you through these places, but you never touch the actual culture. Um, Tourist sites, yes, they're important, but the real beauty of travel is the space in between, getting into the culture, meeting the people, tasting the real food, not the food in the tourist restaurants. That's what it's really about. And it's the same thing on trail, slowing down so you can stop and breathe and be in the moment. It's exactly the same. So I think it transfers perfectly to your travel podcast.
Do at least something that is of the area. And when I was in Ireland, for example, my big thing was to take a train. There's no better way to sort of get seated next to people who you wouldn't normally sit next to than to be on public transportation. And if you take a train all over the place, those are some of my greatest memories from that trip, were being on trains with people who have lived there for 50, 60 years, and people who just moved there from other parts of the world, and you get to hear all these different perspectives. As somebody who knows the physical grind that it takes to do some of these hikes, what do you do? Obviously, biking is one of them, but what are some things that you do to get yourself ready for, a few weeks away from civilization and carrying that pack?
Yeah, it's a great question. Just basic exercise, for backpacking. I do walking. I do this elliptical bike that I just crashed on, which is great for being on trail because it's like running on an elliptical machine, but you're outside. You're not just, in a static gym or something. And I'm constantly refining my backpack. I mean, you know this too from any international travel. The weight of your pack is really limiting. And on a long distance backpack, you want your pack weight without food and water to be approximately 15 pounds, which is really, really hard to achieve with a tent and a sleeping bag and all the other gear. But I keep pushing that. And someday I'd love to be down at 12 pounds because the lighter it is, the further you can go, the more comfortable you are. When I started out, if you read my book on the JMT, I was carrying over 50 pounds and it was crazy. I mean, you're going over 12,000-foot passes carrying a 50-pound pack. It's not easy. So getting your pack weight down is critical. And this applies the same to international travel. I found when I travel internationally, I pack a single backpack. And I don't care how difficult the trip is going to be, temperature wise or whatever. I took a trip in years ago now, but I took a trip where I went to Taiwan, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan in the winter, where Vietnam was sweaty hot and Korea was minus 50, and I had all the gear for all those trips in a single backpack with me. I mean, I didn't have fancy clothes. I wasn't going out for nice dinners or anything, but I was able to carry everything I needed in one pack. And I think that's really important for international travel. You can throw it in the carry-on on the plane and you just go. There's no, you don't have an entourage following you with eight suitcases. So I think pack weight is huge, no matter whether you're backpacking or just traveling.
And I know a lot of our listeners are going to be hitting up California. That is a popular destination for us. So let's say you were taking a California vacation because you're an expert on some of the natural wilderness hot springs and some other natural locations. What are some places where you suggest maybe you're not doing a through hike, but you want to hike for a day or two out of your vacation? What are some, like you said, hidden gems that people can find and maybe don't have to be pro level hikers?
Oh, absolutely. There's a ton. California is just a playground for hiking, and there's all different levels of experience and trail. If I were going to just one natural destination in California, I'd make it Yosemite. Yosemite National Park is just jaw-droppingly amazing. It's really, really amazing. And there are hiking trails all over the park one can take. Um, Other amazing destinations, Desolation Wilderness and, the Tahoe Rim Trail up around Lake Tahoe are fantastic. If you're looking for something for the kids, maybe a little easier, if you go up to the Redwoods, there are some beautiful hikes in the Redwoods that are flat, cool. There are some that you can get onto the beach from the Redwoods, which is really interesting. At the very tip of California, I'm thinking of hikes like the one down to Endert's Beach up there. In Southern California, there are a bunch of places you can visit, both mountains and deserty areas. Joshua Tree, for example, is don't go in the middle of summer, but if you're going in the cooler weather, is absolutely gorgeous. Death Valley in the winter or in the off season, not it, the on season for them. Don't go in the summer is also spectacular for deserty terrain. There's just a ton of stuff through California that you can visit. Even if you're just in the San Francisco area, you can get out to Muir Woods and see the redwoods. You can climb Mount Tamalpais, which is gorgeous. So I mean, we have such a diversity of terrain without getting up to the big national parks. But if you do get into the parks, then there are the hidden parks. Up north, we have Lassen National Park, which is, an active volcanic park. If the kids are interested in volcanoes, you can see a cinder cone, you can climb it, you can see the bubbling pools. It's really, really interesting. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be a California tour guide exactly, but there's a lifetime of stuff to explore out here.
That's funny that you mentioned visiting Joshua Tree National Park during the winter. In 2015, my wife and I moved from Pennsylvania to Arizona. Our very first Christmas day away from our family was spent at Joshua Tree National Park. Beautiful scenery, and a sweatshirt was all we needed to feel comfortable hitting the smaller trails. Definitely a beautiful place to explore.
Yeah, the rocks, the formations, just it's totally different. It's really, really interesting. But yeah, winter you want to go. In the summer, it's just going to be oppressive. Well, some people like it, but it's going to be really, really hot.
Just quickly, before we go, give the book another plug.
Sure. Thanks, Rick. So the book again is called The Trail. It's a novel set on the John Muir Trail, which is a 211-mile hiking trail from Yosemite National Park to the top of Mount Whitney, the highest peak in the continental United States. And it's been a bestseller on Amazon. You can find the trail in your local bookstore. If they don't have it, let them know it's distributed by Ingram. You can order it on Amazon, of course. It's on Kindle as well, or on Audible. So it's pretty easy to find.
Ethan, thank you so much for joining us. I love to give people a little look at different ways to travel and maybe some things that they never thought they would be interested in, but maybe this will pique their interest. And in a few years, they'll be doing some of these hikes just like you enjoy and I've enjoyed in the past.
Thank you for having me, Rick. And I've got to say, even if you don't feel like you want to get out and do a month-long backpacking trip, which I think is a lot, you go out for a weekend. You can car camp. There's so many ways to get out in nature and really enjoy it. And, I didn't start out backpacking these long trails. I started out car camping and then doing short weekend hikes, and it just gradually grew on me. And I think it's organic, but disconnecting from the busy world and getting out in nature is magical. It's rejuvenating. I like to say that recreation is recreation. It's just amazing to be out in nature and what it does for you and your spirit.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rick.
This has been episode 184 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Thanks for sticking with us for a different type of episode and a conversation that didn't revolve around the theme parks. That being said, if everything goes as planned, Maz will be joining me next week to talk about all the big announcements to come out of the D23 Expo this weekend in Anaheim, California. Will we hear about a replacement for Dino Land USA, or what's coming behind Big Thunder Mountain, or even some information about Disneyland Forward? After the disappointments from the Expo 2 years ago and the unfulfilled promises from D23 in 2019, I think expectations are sky high for many Disney fans. That will be next Thursday on Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Until then, have a great week.